And what is going on, everybody? Hope everybody's enjoying their day so far. We are back with some more fantasy football content, and today we'll be giving you our weekly show here as we give you your Week 15 fantasy starts and sits, and also recap what happened week at number 14, and also look at some injuries that will be affecting us here heading into the fantasy football playoffs. And happy fantasy playoffs to those who celebrate and to those who made it. We're going to give you all the rundown here from starts and sits. We'll also look at how our team did in round number one. The playoffs are still going on for us. This is a 2-week thing. So week one was both week 14 and week 15. And then round number two will be week 16 and week 17. However, like I mentioned on the waiver wire videos, most of our fantasy football players will be starting the fantasy football playoffs this week. So as always, before we get into our starts and sits, let's go ahead and kick off our studs and duds from week number 14, and then we'll also run down through some of the key injuries that you also need to be looking at heading into this new week of this NFL season. We are definitely getting down to the stretch run, so let's go ahead and help you out in your championship run. First up is the quarterback stud of the week. I almost went with Josh Allen, but I'm going to give it to Joe Burrow. Even the loss to the Buffalo Bills, he did have those 2 interceptions, which proved costly in that game. But 284 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. And honestly, it looked at one point, was Joe Burrow even going to be back for this Bengals team? And the Bengals at this point of the season are pretty much out of the playoff race. They're a couple of games back in the AFC North, as well as the wild card teams too. So the Bengals season over at this point. But Joe Burrow just continues to produce in this offense. 284 passing yards, like I mentioned, 4 touchdowns. Unfortunately for the Bengals, it wasn't enough because, like I mentioned, those 2 interceptions really changed the outlook of that game in the Bills, and Josh Allen was able to take advantage of those 2. In his return, Joe Burrow has really been outstanding. And if you have Burrow on your lineup, you're definitely putting him in as your starting quarterback, no matter what the matchup is, because you have a guy like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins on your offense, and even Chase Brown has really been overperforming for the past couple of weeks. So Joe Burrow is our quarterback stud of the week. Now let's go on to our running back stud of the week. That's going to be Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans, and what a day it was for both the Titans and Tony Pollard in this one, as Pollard finishes this one 25 rushing attempts, 161 rushing yards, and 2 touchdowns. So it feels like he hasn't had this stat line with his couple of years that he's been with Tennessee. We saw this at times with the Dallas Cowboys, but this is the first time I feel like we really saw this focal point of Tony Pollard. But Pollard finished with 30.1 fantasy points, so there was definitely a lot of running backs I could have gone on consideration. But as up and down as this Titans offense has been, this was definitely nice to see. The Titans did end up getting the victory there against the Cleveland Browns, but Tony Pollard earns our running back stud of the week. We do have a comment coming in here, so let's go ahead and answer it really quick. Sit 1, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Swift, Chris Rodriguez, and Blake Corum. I'm definitely starting both Jacobs. I'm going to start all these except for DeAndre Swift. Swift and the Chicago Bears do have a tough matchup. Meanwhile, Jacobs, Chris Rodriguez, and Blake Corum all have good matchups. I know that Josh Jacobs does have the Denver Broncos defense, but if I'm going to attack the Denver Broncos, it's going to be against the rush. So I think out of all of those, DeAndre Swift, Josh Jacobs is RB1. DeAndre Swift, we've seen times this season, Common guy really have a big game. So out of all those, I would sit DeAndre Swift this week. All right, let's go back to our studs of the week. We're going to go to the Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers. Now, like the running backs, there are also a lot of candidates I could have considered for the wide receiver stud. But ever since Christian Watson has returned off of that injury, he's really been the wide receiver 1 for this Packers offense. And even with Jaden Reed coming back, I still think that Christian Watson is going to be that dominant wide receiver that you're looking for in your lineups. 4 receptions, 89 yards, 2 touchdowns in the Packers' victory. Crucial game against the Chicago Bears. Finished with 25.9 fantasy points. And he did have that one big touchdown play in the second half. Over 40-yard reception to give you that touchdown, to get you that 25.9 fantasy points. So Christian Watson, it feels like for the past couple of weeks, has really been one of the more consistent wide receivers that you can think of. And a lot of people are picking him up on the waiver wire. And if you're able to get him, you are definitely starting him every single week moving forward because Green Bay definitely has some nice matchups coming up. Now let's move on to our tight end stud of the week, and that's going to be Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Pitts is listed as questionable this week, but I do expect him to suit up for the Falcons matchup in Week 15. Pitts continues to be one of the bright spots, especially with the injuries that you have, especially to the wide receivers and Drake London. And Pitts, one of the leading receivers, in a tough matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. Atlanta couldn't really do anything. Seattle, once again, puts up another 20-point outing in fantasy, but 6 receptions, 90 yards, 15 fantasy points. You take that every single day of the week, no matter the tight end that you have, especially with Kyle Pitts, the roller coaster of a career that he's had in the ATL. But Kyle Pitts does earn our tight end stud of the week. So now let's go on to our duds of the week, and we're going to start off on Monday night's matchup, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. And I apologize if you did add Jalen Hurts. If he cost you in your matchup, I saw a lot of people on Twitter complaining that Hurts cost him a playoff spot. So that was definitely unfortunate because Jalen Hurts has definitely had some big weeks, but this was one of his down weeks. Only 240 passing yards. We'll take that from Jalen Hurts week in and week out. But other than that, he only had 4 attempts, 8 yards, no touchdowns in this one. The only touchdown that you had was that long touchdown run by Saquon Barkley, but 4 interceptions in this one coming in overtime, which sealed the deal. For the Chargers, only 4.4 fantasy points, and this ultimately sucks, especially if you did need Jalen Hurts to provide you, like 10-plus fantasy points to get you into the fantasy playoffs, to have a dud like this before the playoffs did get underway. I mean, Jalen Hurts, it was a tough matchup, but I did at least expect Jalen Hurts to get a touchdown, not throw 4 interceptions. So hopefully Hurts and the Eagles can bounce back because it's been a tough past month for this Eagles offense. You have seen A.J. Brown start to step it up. Devontae Smith, I mean, really nobody outside of Saquon Barkley didn't really do anything in this matchup, but Hurts and Devontae Smith and even A.J. Brown do have a better matchup in Week 15. We do have another comment coming in. Playoff question. Who for my quarterback 1? I got Brissett. Waivers, Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, or Caleb Williams. I wouldn't go pick up Caleb Williams. They do have a tough matchup this week. I honestly would just ride with the hot hand Jacoby Brissett, but if you do want a backup option, Trevor Lawrence does have a nice matchup this week, and Lawrence has really been consistently putting up around 20 fantasy points. I don't really like, maybe Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud. So if you are looking for a backup option outside of Jacoby Brissett, I would go pick up Trevor Lawrence, especially the way that the offense has been built. I know that Brian Thomas hasn't been great, but one of his best games this past week. Lawrence has really been consistent in fantasy. So I would stick with Jacoby Brissett, but if you do feel like you do need a backup option, Trevor Lawrence would be my choice out of all of those. Let's go on to the next one, Mahomes or Jackson Dart. I'm starting Jackson Dart this week. He has an A-plus matchup against the Washington Commanders. It feels like the Commanders have given up a ton of yardage and a ton of fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And Dart, coming off of the bye week, so his offense got healthy, I would start both Jackson Dart and Wan'Dale Robinson this week in a very good matchup against the Washington Commanders. All right, let's go back to our duds. We left off with our quarterback dud. Let's go on now to our running back dud of the week. I know that this is a big name that everyone's going to be talking about moving forward, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. In a game where the Browns put up over, Sanders almost had 40 fantasy points. It was kind of a dud performance against a nice matchup against the Tennessee Titans. I was expecting way more from Judkins. And looking at the stat line, I mean, if he didn't have that one catch for 58 yards, he would have gotten under 5 fantasy points. So he was saved in PPR formats. Was a very bad day for him in non-PPR formats. He only had 14 rushing attempts for 26 yards. However, I'm not too worried about him. The Browns do have some nice matchups coming up here in the next couple of weeks. You do have the Bears, which is definitely a defense that you can run on. So I'd still start Quinshon Judkins in your lineup. Now let's move on to the next wide receiver dud. And Emeka Egbuka, after a hot start to the season, he's kind of cooled off here the past couple of weeks. And he was on our sits list last week. I don't know if I mentioned him here on the show, but I know I brought up his name of a potential big player to sit against the New Orleans Saints defense that played pretty solid against Tampa Bay. And especially with the news that we had today, we'll talk about that. Just keep in mind the Bucs do play on Thursday night. So just keep that in mind about all of your Buccaneers players. But only 2 catches, 15 yards. It was a muddy, sloppy game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on offense. It was mainly Bucky Irving production of that game, but only 3.5 fantasy points. At this point, if you do have a better option on your bench, you probably would want to start him over Ike Ebuka. He does have a nice matchup, though, on Thursday night, which we will get into our news and injuries as we head into Week 15. But Ike Ebuka just continues to have disappointment after disappointment recently, but we will see if he can bounce back tomorrow night. Now let's go on now to our tight end dud, Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that everybody knew what was going to happen to the Kansas City Chiefs. Even guys like Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce got bottled up against the Houston Texans defense, which has been one of the more solid units in fantasy football this season, along with the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle's been number 1. Houston's been right there with them, but only 1 catch, 8 yards, 1.8 fantasy points. It was really just an overall bad matchup, so I'm not really too worried about Travis Kelce here moving forward. I mean, Kelce is probably going to be your best option if you do have him on starts, unless you have like Harold Fannin or Colston Loveland sitting there on your bench. But Travis Kelce, this was just an awful performance overall by the Chiefs, and this was just a bad matchup overall. So really no worries from Travis Kelce. And obviously I do expect Rashee Rice to bounce back as well. So now let's go ahead and move on to our news and injuries heading into Week 15. The headline that we had in Week 15. Yes, Philip Rivers is back in action with the Indianapolis Colts. We will have to see if he does get the start. It will not be Daniel Jones. Jones is probably out for probably the rest of the season, I have to guess at this point. It looked like a pretty gruesome injury that he suffered on Sunday afternoon. We'll see if it's Riley Leonard or do they go with Philip Rivers. So I guess we will have to see. Are you starting Philip Rivers? Probably not, because I just really feel like there's better quarterback options out there. Like I mentioned, I'd rather have like Jordan Love. Even Brock Purdy has a plus matchup this week if you can scoop him up on waiver wire. So even if Phil Rivers is named the starter, and if say Riley Leonard gets the start, I wouldn't start either or of them because I just don't know if I could trust the Colts offenses. Jonathan Taylor, I know he's not coming off of that great performance. However, Jonathan Taylor has got you to the fantasy playoffs, hopefully. But now let's move on to what I was talking about with Ike Ebuka. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers activated 2 of their starting receivers, Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan, from injured reserve. So that's definitely good news heading into tomorrow night's matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. So like I mentioned, I mean, I don't know if I would even start Ike Ebuka, especially with Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan coming back into this. It is a nice matchup. Atlanta has been abysmal the past couple of weeks. JSN was able to torch this defense. So if you really have no other resort, start Ike Ebuka, but I would probably go somewhere else. We do have another comment coming in here. Harold Fannin or Ferguson for this week. I'm going to go with Harold Fannin, especially with the injury that we have with David Njoku. Harold Fannin is going to slide into that tight end 1 spot. And Shedeur Sanders, I mean, it doesn't matter the quarterback for the Browns. They really like to target Harold Fannin. So I'm going to trust the hot hand in here. Does have a nice matchup, like I mentioned, against the Chicago Bears. So I'm going to roll with Harold Fannin over Jake Ferguson this week. All right, let's continue on with our news and injuries here, Week 15. We do have some quarterback injury news here. Jayden Daniels once again suffered injury. He's going to be out for this week's game coming up against the New York Giants. So if you do have Jayden Daniels, as your starting quarterback, go ahead and get another option. Like I mentioned, I would go with either Jacoby Brissett this week, even Brock Purdy, Jackson Dart, or Jordan Love. So once again, in line and start will be Marcus Mariota. We have been accustomed to Marcus Mariota this season. So really no one on the Commanders that I really would want to play in this matchup other than Chris Rodriguez, the receivers. I've just been too up and down. You just like who's really going to get the big matchup. And you do have that gruesome injury that Zach Ertz suffers, so you're going to be without Zach Ertz. So really the only Commanders that I would start, to be honest with you, would be Chris Rodriguez. I think you're going to get a lot of dosage in the running game from C-Rod. Now let's move on. Let's see if there's any more news or injuries that we need to get to. That is definitely some big injury news there. Some good news coming out of Tampa Bay. Let's see if there's any more as I scroll down here. Looks like Kyler Murray's still going to be out this week, so fire up Jacoby Brissett in your starting quarterback role. So I think that's most of the news there. Let's see if there's any more that we have before we move on here. We do have some Jets quarterback news. Tyrod Taylor has a groin injury, and Justin Fields' knee injury is in practice Wednesday. So rookie Brady Cook out of Mizzou will get the first team reps in practice. So Brady Cook gets the starting lineup. I would pretty much bench every Jet, to be honest with you. Will not probably be pretty. Maybe if you want to start Breece Hall, go for it. But to be honest with you, if you can avoid any Jets, especially if you don't have no Tyrod or Justin Fields and a rookie getting the start against the Jaguars defense that's coming off of a nice performance, I would probably go the other way. Cardinals are not activating running back Trey Benson. His season is over. Cardinals head coach Jonathan Gannon, quote, said he's disappointed and we're disappointed. So that's the big news coming out of Arizona. No Trey Benson for the rest of the season. So Bam Knight was one of my favorite waiver wire ads heading into this new week of the season. So I would go with Bam Knight. Even in a tough matchup this week, he is still going to be the RB1 moving forward for the Cardinals. And I believe that is all of the news that we have here. So just keep that in mind as we head into week 15 of the season. I believe this is the week where we do have some Saturday games too. Let me go ahead and double check that. I feel like when we get to this point in the season, this is where we have some Saturday games. No, I think it's next week. So sorry about that. That's next week when we start to get Saturday games. So just keep that in mind. But our Thursday night game is the Falcons and the Bucks. Sunday night game is the Vikings and the Cowboys, and the Monday game is the Dolphins and the Steelers. So just keep those primetime games. You're setting your lineups, and also keep in mind heading into Week 16 of the season that when we start seeing those Saturday games. So let's go now to some more questions here. Justin Jefferson, Jameson Williams, Mike Evans, and Brian Thomas. I'm starting both Justin Jefferson and Jameson Williams. Mike Evans is coming off of injured reserve, like I mentioned. Does have a nice matchup, but I'm going to roll with Justin Jefferson and Jameson Williams. I think that a lot of people are going to be steered away from Jameson Williams, especially with the performance that he just had in a plus matchup. Now he has to face off against the Los Angeles Rams, but the Rams secondary has been gettable. I know that Justin Jefferson has been having his low performances, but he's definitely due for a big game. So give me Justin Jefferson and Jameson Williams in start two. I'm definitely not starting Brian Thomas. So I would start both JJ and JMO this week. All right, let's go ahead now, shift our gears from our news and injuries to our Week 15 fantasy starts and sits. So if you have any more starts and sits questions as we go through this, or if you have any questions, because I know that you can't really answer any trade questions, so that deadline has been passed. But we will go ahead and kick off our starts of the week. With the quarterback start of the week, we'll give you two of each position. And we're going to start off with Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. I do expect this to really be one of the more higher scoring games of the week. It feels like it always is when these two teams face off. The Detroit Lions, also a defense, have allowed 17 or more points to 8 quarterbacks this season. Dak Prescott had a good game as well. Even CeeDee Lamb being out of a concussion. You did see Ryan Florney really step up into that role. You also saw George Pickens have an okay game. Javonte Williams had a couple of touchdowns and a couple of big plays there. But Matthew Stafford, he's really been rolling in fantasy football. So I'm just going to ride with the hot hand of Matthew Stafford, especially with the way that this offense has been generating. Puka Nacua coming off of a 150-yard performance and 2 touchdowns. Davante Adams didn't really do too much, but I do expect Davante Adams to really bounce back against this Lions secondary that is definitely gettable. And Matthew Stafford, I could easily see him go over that projected fantasy points of 19.5. and have another like 20-plus fantasy outing. So if you do need a quarterback, and if you are dealing with some injuries, say to like Jayden Daniels, or if you're out without, a guy like Daniel Jones, if you need, Matthew Stafford, if he's available to you, go ahead and pick him up. And let's go on now to the next one. Jackson Dart is our next quarterback start of the week for the New York Giants. Like I mentioned, the Giants are coming off of the bye week in week number 14, and they have a very nice matchup against the Washington Commanders, who've allowed 18-plus points to 9 quarterbacks so far here in this 2025 campaign. And what we like about Jackson Dart, not only is going to give you some points in the rushing department, but as well as the passing department as well. And Wan'Dale Robinson, too. He's been the wide receiver 1 for Jackson Dart. And the running back situation is definitely going to be key. Keep an eye out on another injury here in New York. Will Tyrone Tracy be able to suit up? Because if you remember, in week 13, he was carted off the field. So we will have to see if Tyrone Tracy will be involved in this offense. If not, it will be Devin Singletary. But Jackson Dart, he's really been consistent. I know that he had 1 or 2 bad games there in that stretch. And then he also got banged up with concussion. You did see Jameis Winston get the start. But Jackson Dart, you really love this matchup against the Washington Commanders. So Dart is definitely a must-start option for you if you do need a quarterback option. Now let's move on to our running backs. And Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars, coming off one of his best performances of the season. Did have 2 rushing touchdowns in the Jaguars win. Again, now he has the New York Jets, which the Jets defense has really been abysmal for feels like the majority of the season. This Jets defense so far has allowed 16-plus points to 10 running backs. And Travis Etienne, especially with the way that he's been playing and the way that the Jaguars offense continues really to produce, not only in points term, but yardage term as well. Travis Etienne is definitely a must start for me for my running back position. Now let's move on to our next running back, TreVeyon Henderson of the New England Patriots. I don't think that at the start of the season, we wouldn't be talking about TreVeyon Henderson. We would be talking about Ramondre Stevenson. And TreVeyon Henderson got all the hype, especially in the preseason. I know that I was, along with a lot of fantasy guys here that make content here on YouTube, were very high on TreVeyon Henderson just because of that preseason performance alone. It was a slow start to take over this backfield, and this is a nice matchup that he gets against the Buffalo Bills. Just look at like Chase Brown's been doing. Pretty much every running back has been able to put up some yardage. And so far, they've allowed 10 touchdowns over the last 8 weeks to the running back position. So this is a good bet that TreVeyon Henderson is going to find the end zone. Could be a game where it just could be a back-and-forth battle. The Patriots do have a 2-game lead over the Bills. So this is a key game here in the division with a couple of weeks left. But TreVeyon Henderson is definitely going to have a nice game and what could be a high score and shootout against the Buffalo Bills. Now let's move on to our wide receivers. Our first wide receiver start of the week is going to be Jaylen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. I know that the Dolphins offense hasn't been the greatest in the NFL, but this is matchup dependent once again for Jaylen Waddle going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have allowed the 5th most points to wide receivers since week 8 of the season. So the Steelers defense is a defense that we've been looking at. They've had some better games overall so far this season, but you just saw what Zay Flowers did against that defense. And I think that Jaylen Waddle could definitely produce that as well because he's really only one of the main targets there, especially if you do not have Devon Achane this week. But I do expect Achane to suit up for the Dolphins this week. But this is a very nice matchup for Jaylen Waddle in week 15. Now let's move on to our next wide receiver. We did talk about Jackson Dart. Now we're going to be talking about his wide receiver 1 in Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. And Robinson, last time that we saw him, exploded over 30 fantasy points in that game. He's been having like 2 or 3 of those games this season. The first one that he had was in that shootout game against the Dallas Cowboys, and then he had one in week 13. Now he gets Washington Commanders secondary, which it feels like every wide receiver has had like their career games against this Commanders secondary that has just been abysmal this season. But this defense has allowed 12-plus points to 13 wide receivers so far. I think that Robinson is going to become the 14 wide receiver on that list because I think that this Giants offense is going to cook against the Washington Commanders. So give me Wan'Dale Robinson as one of my favorite starts of the week. Now let's move on to our tight end position. I know that a lot of people aren't going to start Mark Andrews because he's coming off another bad game. It's going to be either a bad game or a good game for him. But if not now, win Mark Andrews because this is the prime matchup for tight ends this season against the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, just look at what Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid was able to do even in those snowy conditions. But all season, the Bengals have allowed the most points to tight ends. So, hell, I mean, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely could be another duo that could really have nice performances. So I do expect a bounce back And this could be another game where he has multiple touchdowns. Wouldn't surprise me at all. The Baltimore Ravens fighting for their AFC North division title. The Bengals looking to spoil the Ravens once again, because we did see this matchup a couple of weeks ago on Thanksgiving night, and the Bengals really took advantage of the Baltimore Ravens defense. So we'll see how this one turns out, but I do expect a big bounce back game for Mark Andrews. If not, then you can't trust this man ever for the rest of the season, because this would be the game that Mark Andrews puts over at least 10 fantasy points. Now let's move on to our next tight end star of the week, Harold Fannin Jr. of the Cleveland Browns. Big performance that he's coming off of 8 catches, 115 yards, and a touchdown. Shedeur Sanders, one of his best games of his career so far. And he gets the Chicago Bears this time, who've allowed almost 14 points to the tight end position over the last 8 weeks. So Harold Fannin, like I mentioned, paired with the David Njoku injury, Harold Fannin has been one of the top targets in this one. I mean, the receivers haven't been that great all season. Quinshon Judkins has been one of the leading receivers, in this offense. So you're just going to go with a hot hand, go with Harold Fannin, and he's going to be one of our tight end starts of the week. So that's our starts of the week. Now let's go ahead and go on to the opposite side of the spectrum here as we go to our Week 15 fantasy sits of the week. And Bo Nix is going to lead us off here. Bo Nix did have a nice matchup last week against the Las Vegas Raiders. Now it's on the opposite side, going up against one of the toughest defense in fantasy football when you are a quarterback, and that's the Green Bay Packers, who've allowed just 12.3 fantasy points to the quarterback position since week number 8. We just saw them bottle up Caleb Williams to just around 12 fantasy points. I mean, Bo Nix only put up 16 fantasy points in a nice matchup against Las Vegas Raiders, so I'm not really expecting too much from Bo Nix. I mean, you did see that one big blow-up game earlier this season where he put up almost 40 points in that comeback game against the New York Giants. But Bo Nix, he had a nice rookie season, but this sophomore season just hasn't been what I expected, because I drafted Bo Nix in pretty much every league that I have been in, and he has definitely been one of the more disappointments at the quarterback position. Now let's move on to our next one. Speaking of disappointments, Kenneth Walker has been the disappointment at the running back position this season of the Seattle Seahawks. And going up against the Indianapolis Colts, honestly, it's not that bad of a matchup on paper. But Walker's red zone threat of 2025, it's been Zach Charbonnet. They get to the one, it's Zach Charbonnet. So you really rely on touchdowns. And Kenneth Walker has been he hasn't had those big type games that we're looking for to win us a game, especially we're in the fantasy football playoffs. So it is a nice matchup. But Kenneth Walker is a guy that I just cannot trust at all heading into a crucial moment of your fantasy season. So Kenneth Walker is my running back sit of the week. And honestly, we will talk about him. We might just do a disappointments of 2025 when all things said and done. And Kenneth Walker will definitely be at the top of that list. Now let's move on to the next one. Man, this is just disappointment after disappointment this season. DJ Moore of the Chicago Bears. Tough matchup going up against the Cleveland Browns. The Browns defense have really been solid. They've allowed just 3 touchdowns to wide receivers over the last 8 weeks. And DJ Moore, what is he now? The wide receiver 3 on this offense. If Rome Odunze is healthy and ready to go this week, Luther Burden at this point may have just overtaken the wide receiver 2 role in this offense. And DJ Moore has definitely been a dud for this Bears offense. Has been pretty solid this season. That's why they're at the top of their division. But DJ Moore in a tough matchup, I honestly would just rather have another option than Moore. Now let's move on to the next one. And for back-to-back weeks, Rondé Gadsden is our tight end sit of the week. These are just 2 brutal matchups back-to-back week for Gadsden. Kansas City Chiefs, only 2 tight ends have been able to score more than 10 points this season. Honestly, I even said it last week, Gadsden at this point might even be droppable at this point. I'd rather have guys like Colston Loveland, hell, even Jawan Johnson. At least he's been able to catch some passes from Tyler Shuck. But pair with a tough matchup, this might just be a low-scoring game, especially the way the Chargers defense and the Chiefs defense has been playing. So this is a big one. Both of these teams fighting for their playoff hopes. But I would not even touch Gadsden in this matchup, because I think that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to continue that streak of only allowing 2 tight ends to score more than 10 points this season. We do have another comment coming in here. Help my lineup pick 4: Godwin, Mike Evans, QJ Odunze, likely Theo Johnson, and Judy. I do like Likely out of all the tight ends in this situation. Quentin Johnson, like I mentioned, does a tough matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. If Rome Odunze is playing, man, these are just some tough matchups that you have your wide receiver. I would start Mike Evans and Isaiah Likely, though. Like I mentioned, the Cincinnati Bengals do have given up the most yardage in that one. So out of those, I would start Mike Evans. Likely, hell, even Theo Johnson, too, at this point, because Theo Johnson also has a nice matchup against the Washington Commanders. I just don't really like the matchups for QJ Odunze, Jerry Jeudy, Chris Godwin. I guess I would just go with Rome Odunze since he's the wide receiver one, but don't like the matchups for all of those wide receivers. So hopefully I was able to help you out there. So I guess overall I would start Mike Evans, Odunze, Likely, and Theo Johnson. I know I said two tight ends, but like I mentioned, I don't like QJ's matchup or Judy's matchup. So I will go with two tight ends and Mike Evans and Odunze. All right, let's go on now to our team overall, how we did in the first round of the fantasy playoffs. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, we are still in the first round of the playoffs, but how this works, it's both week 14 and in week 15. So let's go ahead and see how we did in, I guess you would say, like the first part of this round. So it looks like, looking at the scoreboard at the top, we are facing the Birds, who this is a number 1 seed versus number 4 seed. If you remember, we did lose in week number 13 to drop all the way from the 2 seed to the 4 seed. So that ultimately sucked because we got the worst matchup. But honestly, we put up a lot of points. The only problem is our opponent also put up a lot of points, 149.54 to 139.16. And is this the other matchup? I hope this is not. Is it really 39.6 to 124.44? Why the hell we couldn't win? Because we would be blowing mushrooms out right now. However, I guess it is what it is. But honestly, having about a 10-point deficit at this point isn't the worst thing overall. But we will go through the score and breakdown. Let's go through I guess I was trying. We have to go back to week 14. Let me go back to week 14. We'll go to the score and breakdown. Then we'll go to my team to see if we need to make any changes. And we'll also look at, potential players that we can also pick up and add to the lineup. So let's go back to what happened in week number 14. Looking at our quarterbacks did face off on Thursday night. We ended up going with Jared Goff over Bo Nix, which ultimately was the right call there. It was about pretty easy, 16, and Dak Prescott in the loss against the Lions at 18.44. Running backs, so, we had our two beasts of running backs, Saquon Barkley and Chase Brown, both putting up 18 points. He did have JT and James Cook, who put up 11 and 11 each. So running backs, we were able to get them there. Wide receivers, though, he did have Puka Nacua, but we were able to counter with Jackson Smith and Jigba. JSN did have 28.1. Puka for him at 35.7. Our wide receiver 2, George Pickens at 8. Emeka Egbuka had 3. It was pretty much okay versus okay there. But tight end with Tyler Warren, another dud game, 3 points for him. Kyle Pitts at 15. Flex spot, though, RJ Harvey had 22 against the Raiders. Courtland Sutton, on the other hand, had 12. Defense, our Seahawks defense continues to be our MVP here, putting up 20 points. The Texans with 13. And this is honestly where we lost our matchup. Brandon Aubrey put up 24. Chase McLaughlin put up 9. So really looking at, there's not really many things that we could have done. We had, our bench was stacked with talent. Christian Watson had 24, Amarin Hampton, so probably should have started 1 or 2 over Emeka Egbuka, but it is what it is. I still think that we have a pretty good shot, even though we are down by a little bit over 10 points. But looking at the other matchup, this is pretty much over. Looks like Ben's best team is going to cruise. Don't know what really happened to Mushroom's team. It's just, I don't think he's checking his lineup anymore. That's why. Damn it. If we would have got the 2 seed, we would have got a bye at this point. But honestly, if we're able to beat the Birds, I feel really good about our chances of winning this league overall. Let's go back to some more comments. We do have one coming up here. If Higgins is out, should I flex Fannin or Kincaid, or if Burden? Two really good tight end matchups there. Out of Fannin or Kincaid, I do like Fannin better this week. If you feel more confident about a wide receiver, If Odunze is out yet again this week, I would go with Burden. But if Odunze is back, I would go with Harold Fannin this week, especially if we don't have T. Higgins this week. All right, let's go back to our team overall here. So definitely not starting Jared Goff against Los Angeles Rams. I'm definitely not starting Bo Nix. So this might be a week where we go pick up, another quarterback here and maybe, drop somebody like Troy Franklin or somebody like that. But looking at our overall team, we do have Alvin Kamara potentially coming back. He has a nice matchup against the Carolina Panthers, but some of our position players have some tough matchups because I'm looking at like Emeka Egbuka has a tough matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. RJ Harvey against the Green Bay Packers. Martin Hampton goes up against the Chiefs, and Christian Watson goes up against the Denver Broncos. So all tough matchups. We'll see what we can do because I may be able to make some changes to our lineups. Let's see what players are available, and we will just go position by position. We'll see if we do need to make any changes heading into, I guess, part 2 of this round 1 matchup here. So now let's go to the quarterbacks. I think we definitely do need to pick up another quarterback. Do have some I think we are honestly going to be picking up Trevor Lawrence in this one and probably dropping, either a guy like Bo Nix or somebody like that. I think that's exactly what we're going to do there. I mean, Jacoby Brissett against the Houston Texans. I mean, that's definitely going to be a tough matchup. CJ Stroud is a tough matchup. Jordan Love against the Denver Broncos. I mean, Love has been cooking. But give me Trevor Lawrence against the Jets. I mean, I think that's where we're going to go there. So let's go ahead and drop for now. I'm going to go drop Jared Goff, and I think we're going to be starting Trevor Lawrence this week. See if we can continue his production of putting around those 20 fantasy points every single week. So Trevor Lawrence at the moment will be our starter. Let's continue on now to the running back position to see if there's any running backs that we could scoop up and plug into our lineup. But we are pretty stacked, though, at the running back position. Chris Rodriguez has a really nice matchup that I think that I honestly do want to pick him up. So let's go ahead and pick up Chris Rodriguez Jr. I know I'm going to have like a ton of running backs here on the bench, but I really like our options with Brian Thompson, Christian Watson. I think we're at do or die at this point. Troy Franklin has had a good season so far, but let's go ahead and try and play some matchups this week with our running back position. So we'll make our changes here in a little bit, but I will continue to go through the running back position. Then we'll go to the wide receivers and so on and so forth. Let's go on now back to the running back. So if you do have Chris Rodriguez available to you, definitely go pick him up. That is an A-plus matchup for him. Really outside of this, I mean, I don't really like too much on this list. I mean, if Devin Singletary is named the starter, Blake Corum is a nice option. He's really been good. So Devin Singletary and Blake Corum would be my 2 options here. Bam Knight as well. I know he's going up against the Houston Texans, but if you are going to get the Houston Texans in fantasy, it is against the rush. So if you do need a running back, go pick up Bam Knight, Devin Singletary, and Blake Corum for this week. And now let's go on to the wide receiver options. DJ Moore, no thank you. Jacoby Myers, definitely a stash for this week against the New York Jets. Romeo Doubs is available. Matthew Golden, Jaden Higgins. Higgins has definitely been really good for the Texans. A.D. Mitchell also. But really outside of that, it is slim pickings on the wide receiver. But I think overall for our roster, I think we are pretty set at that position. Tight ends, really good tight end options in this league. You got guys like Harold Fannin, Juwan Johnson, Dalton Schultz. Looks like David Njoku is listed as questionable. I guess we'll see if he plays or not. And Theo Johnson has a nice matchup against the Washington Commanders. Same with Colston Loveland and Brendan Strange. So there's a lot of tight ends, even Darren Waller. So there's a lot of tight ends. So if you do need a tight end, definitely go pick up one of those. I mean, it goes all the way down to even guys like Isaiah Likely that I would trust in that matchup against the Bengals. Now let's go on to our defenses. Let's see if there's any defenses that you can stream for your leagues in general. I think our top options, I don't know if I would trust the Bills defense. Wouldn't trust the Bucs defense in that matchup either. You got the Cowboys against the Minnesota Vikings, the Commanders. I wouldn't even touch them against the New York Giants. There's some slim pickings here. I mean, even the Bears. I mean, Shedeur has been cooking. So, I mean, there's some slim pickings. I guess the top option would be the Dallas Cowboys against the Minnesota Vikings in that Sunday night game. But really outside of that, there's not like really a defense that's really jumping at the bit for me. I mean, if the Texans were available, but they're not going to be available. against the Arizona Cardinals. But yeah, the defense is pretty slim pickings here. But we will go back to our lineup here. So let's go ahead and set our lineup for Week 15. We did pick up Chris Rodriguez, and I think we are going to be starting him over R.J. Harvey. I know that R.J. Harvey is our RB1, but that matchup is brutal going up against the Green Bay Packers. So I think we are going to make that swap. Chris Rodriguez Jr. We'll go into our flex spot for now against the Giants. We'll see if I have any changes about that. But I think for now, we are going to go with Emeka Egbuka. But I don't know, man. Emeka Egbuka has been struggling. But looking at all of our other wide receivers, I mean, Christian Watson has been really strong. But, man, is he going to go up against Patrick Surtain? If he does, then I just don't really like Christian Watson this week. So I think for now, we are going to go with Emeka Egbuka against the Atlanta Falcons, even with Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan back. I hate that for us, but there's really no other wide receivers that I trust. I trust like some of these wide receivers that we have here on our bench, but really outside of that, like looking at the waivers, I just don't really see a wide receiver that's catching my eye. So I think we're just going to be stuck with Emeka Egbuka, and hopefully that he can get really out of the snide. Because looking at like his past couple of weeks, it's been 9, 6, 8, and 3. But looking at the matchups, like the Bills defense, that would be a matchup where he could explode. Same for Arizona. In New Orleans, we'll see what he does against Atlanta, because in week number 1, he had 4 catches for 67 yards and 2 touchdowns. So you know what? We're just going to ride with Emeka Egbuka. But I guess we'll have to see if I do make any changes. I'll definitely keep an eye out on that throughout the week. But let's go ahead and go back to our matchup. But before that, we do have another question coming in. So let's go ahead and try and answer that here. All right, let's go ahead. Who should I start in my 2 flex spots? You got Khalil Shakir, Hunt, Sutton, or Vidal in the playoff. So let me go ahead and look at these matchups just to refresh my memory. I think that Buffalo has the New England Patriots. Hunt, let's see. I'm trying to get every single matchup here. Give me 1 second so I can answer this here. I know that Sutton and Vidal, out of all those, I honestly think I'm going to go with Khalil Shakir and Courtland Sutton here. I'm going to ride with the 2 wide receivers. Kamani Vidal, the Chargers against the Chiefs. I just don't really like that matchup necessarily. And Hunt going up against the Chargers. I think that the Chargers-Chiefs game is going to be one of the lower scored matchups of the weekend. So give me, the points in Khalil Shakir's matchup. And Courtland Sutton does have a tough matchup against the Green Bay Packers. However, he's really been solid this season. So give me Courtland Sutton and Khalil Shakir for your 2 starts in the flex spot this week. Now let's go back to our matchup here in Week 15. So it looks like he's pretty much got the same lineup. Doesn't look like he's changed anything. On our side, we changed who we have in the flex with Chris Rodriguez. I need to ask you, should we start Emeka Egbuka, or should I be riding? Let me go back to my team here. I want to see if y'all have any opinions on who should we be starting in the wide receiver slot. So right now we do have Emeka Egbuka. Should we ride with Emeka Egbuka against Atlanta Falcons, or should I be starting Christian Watson against the Denver Broncos? I'll leave that question up in the air for the chat. Should I be starting Emeka Egbuka in tomorrow night's matchup against the Falcons, or should I go with Christian Watson against the Denver Broncos? I'll go ahead and give it a couple of minutes. We do have some more questions. If you have any other questions about starts and sits, drop them in the chat. I'll go ahead and answer that. All right, let's go ahead and pick them up. How serious is Chris Rodriguez Jr. groin injury? Should we pick up JCM? Let me go ahead and read up to that, because I just saw the report on that. So let me go ahead and just see what is going on there. Let's see if ESPN has anything. So Rodriguez didn't practice Wednesday due to a groin injury. With health concern now in tow, though, Rodriguez's status will need to be monitored as the week goes on to get a sense of his odds to play Sunday at the Giants. If he doesn't practice tomorrow, then I would definitely get concerned. I don't think, practicing Wednesday doesn't really mean too much, especially we're so early still in the week. But if he doesn't practice tomorrow, then more than likely means that his status is going to be up in the air. I would, if you need JCM, I would definitely go pick him up. But like I mentioned, let me go back to the running backs. if you have guys like, let me go ahead and just go through the running backs, because even JCM, I wouldn't really be too thrilled about picking him up. I'd rather have guys. Let me just go through the running backs. So that's just great because I just pick up Chris Rodriguez. I guess we'll have to monitor that. But I would rather have guys like Bam Knight this week in a nice matchup against the Houston Texans. Devin Singletary, if Tyrone Tracy doesn't play, and even Blake Corum. So even if Chris Rodriguez is ruled out for this game, I mean JCM, the sample size is there. I mean he had that one big game everybody was glowing about, and ever since then, I mean it just has been awful for JCM. So even if Chris Rodriguez is out this week, I would rather those options that I mentioned if you do have them available on your waiver wire. I own Breece Hall, Woody Marks, Devin Neal, and Kyle Monangai currently. I definitely think, say Chris Rodriguez out, start Woody Marks. Woody Marks has really good matchup this week. So out of all those running backs, I would start Woody Marks. So wouldn't start Breece Hall this week, especially if you do have Brady Cook starting. So if you do need a backup option, Woody Marks would be my first option. Devin Neal would be my second option if Alvin Kamara does not return to the lineup. But just keep an eye out on the injury, like I mentioned. But just because he doesn't practice today, we'll see tomorrow's injury report. If he doesn't practice on Thursday, then we really start to get concerned about Chris Rodriguez's status against the New York Giants because he does have a nice matchup. But like I mentioned, looking at your running back options, I would definitely start Woody Marks if we do not have Chris Rodriguez on Sunday. All right, so I think that is it. If you have any more questions, you could drop them in on the chat. Even when we're done here with the live stream, I can always go back and answer your questions. I'll try to go through your comments as soon as I can. But if nobody has any more questions, that is going to be it for our fantasy football live show. I'm just wishing everybody good luck in the first round of your fantasy playoffs. And if you're lucky enough to have a bye, congratulations for you. If you didn't miss the playoffs, hopefully you can respond with a nice 2026 campaign. So we only have a couple of more weeks of this fantasy football season, and we're really going to start really not off the bat looking at 2026, but the 2026 draft season is definitely looking interesting because we're going to start answering the question of who should be the 1.01 heading into these 2026 fantasy drafts, because I don't think it's going to be as cut and clear right now in terms like will it be guys like Jonathan Taylor and CMC, or will it still continue to be the wide receivers that remain at the top spot, like Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb in 2026? That's going to be an interesting question that we can definitely look at as we close the door here on this 2025 campaign. But closing terms, I wish you all the best as we start this next journey in the fantasy season, in the fantasy football playoffs. And I appreciate everybody for tuning in, leaving your comments. I definitely appreciate the interaction. Hopefully I was able to help everybody out that was tuning in to the live show. And we will be back with another live show next Wednesday night as we recap what happened in Week 15, as well as look at Week 16 as we start to head into the second round of these fantasy playoffs. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your week, and I'll see you here next time. So long for now.